Is Russia preparing for another mobilization? Well, in 2022, Putin mobilized 300,000 reservists for the war in Ukraine. Back then, the reaction was immediate. Protests broke out, flights filled up, and hundreds of thousands of Russians left the country. Since then, Putin has worked hard to avoid doing it again. Instead, Russia has relied on volunteers, high military salaries, large signing bonuses, prison recruitment, foreign recruits, and regional campaigns to keep the army supplied with manpower. Hey, quick favor. I'm trying to get this channel to 5,000 subscribers as quick as possible. If you like what you heard, you know what to do. Because now there are signs Russia is preparing for the possibility that the volunteer system may eventually not be enough. Electronic summonses are part of the draft system. Military records have become more centralized. The government has expanded its recruitment options. And according to Western intelligence officials cited by the Wall Street Journal, Russian regents have recently been testing the logistics required for another mobilization. Doesn't mean Putin has ordered one. In fact, the Kremlin says he hasn't. But Russia appears to be building a much better machine for mobilization than the one it had in 2022. So the real question isn't whether Russia can mobilize again. It's what would finally make Putin decide that he has to. Now, why doesn't Putin want another mobilization? The one in 2022, it solved the military problem. Russia needed soldiers, but then it created a political problem. Before the call-up, millions of Russians could keep the war at a distance. Professional soldiers were fighting it. For many families, Ukraine was something they watched on television. Mobilization has changed that. Suddenly, the war could take a husband, a son, a brother, a co-worker. The Kremlin learned real fast that Russians may tolerate a long war, but they'll tolerate it a lot better when somebody else is paid to fight it. So Moscow increasingly tried to buy manpower instead of compelling it. Signing bonuses grew. Regional governments competed for recruits. That approach has allowed Putin to avoid another mass call-up for nearly 4 years. But in itself, it creates two problems. The first is cost. If recruiting gets harder, the government has to offer more money for the next volunteer. The second is labor. Every new soldier is also one fewer worker available to factories, construction companies, transportation networks, and even Russia's defense industry. And Russia needs people to build weapons as much as it needs people to use weapons. Is the volunteer system under pressure? Well, Russia is still recruiting large numbers of soldiers. So it would be wrong to say the volunteer system has collapsed. But the incentives required to sustain it, that tells us something more. Signing bonuses have repeatedly increased, recruiting networks have expanded, and in some areas, people are being rewarded simply for finding someone else willing to sign a military contract. I know you've heard about the North Korean troops, and they can definitely help, but they cannot replace Russia's entire manpower requirement. Russia still has to defend a very long front, replace casualties, rotate exhausted units, and maintain reserves while continuing offensive operations. And that's why recent mobilization exercises matter. The Wall Street Journal reports that Russian authorities have tested procedures for receiving mobilized personnel, housing them, feeding them, equipping them, and preparing them for military service. One reported exercise took place in Kaliningrad, with similar preparations reportedly happening elsewhere. Again, preparation is not the same as decision, but there is a difference between having mobilization plans sitting in a binder and actually testing whether the system works. If Russia mobilizes again, it won't look like 2022. That first call-up was chaotic. Records were outdated. Local military offices struggled. And once Russians understood what was happening, many had time to leave. Russia has spent years improving that system. A centralized military registry and electronic summonses give the state better information about who is eligible and how to reach them, which creates more possibilities. Putin may not need to announce one dramatic nationwide call-up of 300,000 men. A future mobilization could be more selective. Think specific regions, specific military specialties, specific age groups. Smaller waves spread over time. That could reduce the political shock while still producing additional manpower. Now, this is where September becomes interesting. Russia's State Duma election is scheduled for September 20, voting from September 18 through the 20th. A major mobilization before an election would carry obvious political risk. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky now says Ukraine believes Russia plans to mobilize another 300,000 troops after those elections. Well, that claim has not been independently confirmed. And obviously, Russia denies that any mobilization is happening. So we should not treat 300,000 as a fact. But the timing is worth watching. Now, what would actually trigger another mobilization? There are several signals that would make another mobilization much more likely. The first would be a serious recruiting shortfall. If volunteers are no longer replacing battlefield losses, Putin eventually has to find those soldiers somewhere else. The second would be a major new offensive. Replacing casualties is one thing. Creating additional formations for a much larger offensive, that requires large amounts of manpower. The third would be a major battlefield setback that forces Moscow to reinforce threatened areas quickly. And the fourth is political timing. If the Kremlin concludes that it needs more men, it will probably choose the moment when the political cost is easiest to manage. That's why the period after September deserves our attention. None of this means another mobilization is certain. Putin has powerful political and economic reasons to avoid it. But Russia has spent the last 4 years making sure that if he decides he needs one, the state is much better prepared to carry it out. So I wouldn't say Russia is mobilizing today. I would say something more important is happening. Russia is preparing itself that it can mobilize tomorrow. If the volunteer system stops producing enough soldiers, that distinction could disappear very quickly. Hey, this is Frank with America's Geopolitics. If you like what you heard, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.